This is always an interesting topic to talk about hurricanes. Okay, so I wanted to take the time to put something out so that people understand it better, especially people that don't live in the state of Florida that haven't experienced hurricanes before. So it's always interesting to hear what people have experienced or they've heard through the media versus people what actually happens during a hurricane. So for our clients, for other people that are just interested in knowing more about how to prepare for a hurricane, I wanted to make something kind of relatively short, like 30 minutes. I wanted to be try to hit the major points without going overboard and having huge checklists and stuff like that, because pretty much anybody can like create a lot of checklists in that. But I wanted to let you know personally from my experience what I've experienced as a property manager over 25 years, a landlord 25 years, and I've been through literally, and Parrish has been in the area as well for a long time, but I think it's been a dozen or more hurricanes. Okay, so whether it's Category 5, I date back all the way to Hurricane Charlie back in 2004. I was working at Red Fortress as well, or Realty Services doing business at Red Fortress. So I've been through a lot. So I'm going to share some of the knowledge that can help you, whether you live here in the state of Florida, whether you have rental properties through us, you have a rental property, or thinking about getting rental properties, some of the ideas that you might want to consider when hurricanes are coming. All right, so just to let you know officially, the hurricane season starts from June 1 and ends only in November 30th, believe it or not. So there's a 6 month period of time when people are like, okay, theoretically, we can get hit with a hurricane. Most of the time, we find that our hurricanes are going to occur in late August, September, maybe early October. So we're not quite out of the hurricane season yet. So we're just kind of starting, but most of the time, again, it's going to come later on. So it's perfect timing for you guys to be here on the video. And my role again today is to help educate you, whether you're a client of ours or a landlord, how to approach these subject areas. Now, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. Parrish can always interrupt or get my attention or ask the question. There will be time at the end though, once we get this done, for you guys to ask questions, okay? And so one of the things that I wanted to talk today about is a couple of different themes, all right? First of all, what you're probably seeing over here, okay, and hopefully you can see it with my little arrow, is this is a photo of Hurricane Ian, right when it's making landfall, right where we are here. This is the eye of the storm right over here. And one of the things that you might notice about the photo is that hurricanes are massive. And Hurricane Ian, when it hit our area, it literally was almost covering the entire state of Florida with cloud and rain. Okay, so just to give you an idea. So we're going to talk a bit about modern facts about hurricanes. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is what's actually factual about hurricanes. So every year, I don't know about you, but I get emails from all kinds of people saying how it's going to be an active storm season. There's going to be 20 plus hurricanes. Hurricanes are speeding up, they're slowing down, they're faster, they're slower, they're bigger, they're smaller. So I did some research I wanted to share with you guys on facts about hurricanes. Then we're going to get into your home or your possible home that you're looking at buying and needed protections. Okay. All hurricanes are different. All right. And that's what we're going to talk about, what we should be afraid of or what we are afraid of. What are things that actually happen during the hurricane when you're looking at your rental property, what to prepare for. Then we're going to get into who can do what type of work. So once we start figuring out what are some of the problems, who should be doing it? Is it a renter? Is it us? Should you guys, chime in as an owner to say what to do? Then finally, towards the end, we're going to get towards briefly insurance. I don't want to turn this into an insurance seminar because I'm not an insurance agent, but just some points about insurance that you might want to consider. And then also what happens after a hurricane hits. So what happens as a client of Red Fortress? What should you expect from your property manager? What is it like on the ground? Again, if you don't live here, really unusual, surreal times that you go through. So I want to run you through what we do and how we do it towards protecting our clients. Okay, so interestingly enough, I was in Matlacha, which is just west of Cape Coral, and I was talking with a guy who runs a small business out there. He's like a chocolatier, fudge kind of maker. And I was talking to him and I said, well, how did you during Ian? He goes, I got wiped out. Like everything, flooding and that sort of stuff. And he said to me literally that most of the people on Matlacha cannot even get flood insurance anymore. They're uninsurable. And then he said to me, he was like, I've been in this area for 30 years. I said, oh, yeah, so have I. And he goes, it seems to me that the storms are getting worse, that sort of thing. Okay. So I thought, well, let's take a look at what actually is happening, for the last, say, 100 years. So, real quickly, when we're talking about the intensity of hurricanes, okay, whether it's category 1, category 3, category 5, are they actually increasing? So you've heard that things are getting worse. The seas are getting colder, the seas are getting warmer, there's more of them. So this little chart here talks about the last number of hurricanes that have made landfall in Florida in the last 120 years. And one of the things that's interesting is that they have a bar here, kind of like close to 120 miles an hour or knots. They talked about the intensity of major hurricanes. And one of the things that this gentleman did through a survey of 100 years is saying, you know what, things are pretty much the way that they normally have been. So you've seen some clusters at the turn of the 20th century here where they were a lot worse. And now you can see kind of like at the beginning of the 21st century, you're seeing a cluster here. But generally speaking, this intensity of hurricanes is kind of falling in line with historical norms, okay? So if the press is saying a lot of stuff about things, okay, fair enough, a hurricane can be bad. And like we'll find out, there are a lot of examples of how hurricanes are different. But having said that, scientifically, hurricanes are not slowing down or getting worse or getting better. They're pretty much staying the same. In addition, let's talk about the hurricane frequency in terms of major versus minor hurricanes. You can see here again, last 50 years, where the orange numbers here represent major hurricanes category 3, 4, and 5. Category 3, again, being a typical hurricane where they consider a major one. That's the dividing line versus a category 2 and 1 hurricane. And then you can also see down here, say, you could see a blue, which represents smaller hurricanes, category 1 and 2, which also can be damaging. But again, the wind speed is not as severe. So once again, when you look at this graph, you can see that it was a pretty tough year in 2020. You can see that there was a very tough year back here. It was in 2004. I remember that. We had, again, 15 hurricanes that hit. We had 4 that literally went through the state of Florida, like in rapid succession. Like, it seemed like week after week after week we got hit with one. And so once again, when you're looking at the actual number of hurricanes, again, they're looking at the Atlantic basin. That's where the hurricanes originate. You could see that for the most part, another bar graph if you'd like, that we're pretty much on a good even keel. Maybe we're slightly increasing in terms of frequency, but I just wanted to share that with you that, we haven't finished the 2020s yet. We might have, another, hopefully none, but 1 or 2 hurricanes over here. But generally speaking, like you're seeing, not a huge increase in the frequency of hurricanes. So when you hear that, that we're going to have a very busy hurricane season. Historically, that's not really been the case, okay, over the last 100 years. So, having said that, let's talk a bit about the hurricane side of things. And like I said to you, every single hurricane that you see is different, every single one. So, having been through 12, there's lots of wind and rain, but how things are affected is always different. So, first of all, the size of the hurricane is different, the wind speed of the hurricane is different, the speed of the hurricane itself moving is different. It could be obviously much faster or slower. We prefer fast hurricanes typically, so it drops less water on us. Where it hits landfall, all kinds of different things or factors are different in each hurricane. Okay, and the media again tries to portray it in terms of like what's the most significant speed of a storm. All of them can be difficult, dangerous, damaging. It doesn't necessarily matter whether it's a category 4 or a category 3 or a category 2. Um, Different areas or damage affects different areas. So, for instance, if you're living in Lehigh, your effect of from a hurricane is going to be much different from somebody on the coast, obviously. So in Lehigh, you might be concerned about, say, wind and rain and so forth, but not as much as storm surge. Whereas on the coast, you're going to be more concerned probably about storm surge. So depending on where you are and your area, you're going to be affected differently from the hurricane, obviously. And not just that, but even neighbors are affected differently from a hurricane. So not only is it different if you live in Bonita Springs versus Lehigh versus Port Charlotte, but literally during Hurricane Irma, my pool cage got damaged. It looked as if like an elephant went right through one side of it, just blew the entire thing out, the metal and everything. My next door neighbor did not even have a screen that was damaged. Okay, so once again, the damage from a hurricane, you never know how it's going to go. So one of the things that we look at for a hurricane is obviously the wind. Now, most of the time people are talking about the sustained wind factor of a hurricane. They also mention gusts of up to X amount of miles per hour. Honestly, the wind during a hurricane is pretty constant. If there is some type of increase in gusts, normally you're not really going to feel it. There's a lot of wind, there's a lot of rain, and it happens for a long time. So the wind is going to take things like cars, or not cars, I should say, but car signs, tree limbs, chairs, that sort of thing. You can see those being affected by the wind. I've seen signs like metal signs go down the street. I've seen things like that where when we're coming up to talking a little bit later about what our residents need to try and do, these are the types of things that definitely we can minimize the damage that's caused by projectiles through the wind. Another aspect of the hurricane is rain and flooding. So what most people understand is that there's a lot of rain and that a lot of the rain can cause flooding. And there is a difference between rain and the flooding, just like there's a difference between flooding and storm surge. Okay, so follow me here. So as the rain starts to accumulate and as our areas are trying to get rid of that runoff rainwater, you might start getting things backed up. Tree limbs are starting to block the streets, so therefore it's not as easy to get rid of the water. Okay, that's where you're not just having rain coming down, but you can start having water backing up and starting to potentially flood homes. Okay, it's the sheer volume of rain, but also our ability to get rid of that water. Okay, another thing about the rain that most people don't realize is how fast and heavy it comes down. And what it does is, as we found out particularly in 2004 with Hurricane Charlie, is that it destabilizes trees. So this is not often talked about by the media, but for instance, in Hurricane Charlie, where I used to live, several of the properties were older and they had these beautiful oak trees from like up north. And the problem is that the trees from up north aren't used to getting, say, X number of inches of rain within a couple of hours. So when the ground starts to get saturated, the wind is blowing, it's going to start swaying the tree, and eventually that tree might fall over in one direction into a street or in some cases into the actual home. Okay, so we had also kind of a sad note to say the least, but during Hurricane Irma, where it was a Category 5, and I was here for that, there was a banyan tree, a 150-year-old banyan tree, if some people might remember, that was near Edison, the Edison Ford Estates. It fell over, and literally the roots of this tree were about 50 feet in the air. It was massive. So you could say, well, that's a really big tree. It probably won't fall over. That's not necessarily the case. I have photos of it. It was amazing. So rain destabilizes trees. You have flooding. You also have the storm surge. Now, the storm surge until Ian was something that was mostly talked about, but we never really experienced here in the Fort Myers, Bonita Springs area, okay, or Port Charlotte area. Hurricane Ian was special because for years we had heard about the storm surge and it never happened until Ian. And Ian happened because of two very specific reasons. The first was that Hurricane Ian happened at high tide, meaning the highest level of water during the day. So that was one of the reasons why we had such a huge storm surge. Okay, and a storm surge occurs where as you have that pressure of the storm system coming, it's pushing water ahead of it. It's raining down as well, but it's pushing water ahead of it, and then it just basically throws it onto the land. Okay, which gets to the next point of effects of hurricane damage, which has to do with the storm direction. So here's something that you really should pay attention to if we're starting to have tropical storm warnings and that. Where is the storm direction coming from? If it is coming from the west, like Hurricane Ian, like Milton, like Helene, that was out in the Gulf, and it was coming towards Florida, that is a possibility where we have significant storm surge because it's taking all of that water and it's bringing it to the shoreline. If, however, you have something like Hurricane Irma that came up from the south, or other storms that came in 2004 that came across from the east coast of Florida, now you're no longer concerned with storm surge. It's not coming from the water. You're now concerned about the wind and rain aspect. Okay. A final point on this is just a terminology about evacuation zone versus flood zone. So you often hear these terms used, like, the Florida Keys is a flood zone, or Lee County is a flood zone, and maybe the Florida Keys is an evacuation zone. What exactly does that mean? Very simple, without going into a lot of details again. An evacuation zone means that they are concerned whether you're going to live or not. They are concerned about your health. They're concerned about whether they can get there in time, that they, because of the intensity of the hurricane, they may not be able to provide you medical assistance. And unfortunately, we saw that in Ian. Okay. Flood zone is something different. Flood zone is talking more about the property damage. And they're talking about how there might be a flooding, and that how you might have to adjust to that flooding. You might not be able to get out of your home if you have a regular car due to the floods, that sort of thing. So those are some terminology. Damage, kind of like a bigger picture of what can actually happen with hurricane damage. In other words, what is it that we're actually trying to protect our property from? It depends on a couple of things: storm direction, obviously where your property is located, and a lot of the different categories or characteristics of a hurricane. They're always different. So a category 3 that happened, say 3 years ago or 10 years ago, if we had another category 3 tomorrow, it could be totally different in terms of the results. Okay, so let's talk a bit about how best to protect
Michael,
your
real
property.
quick, there was
Sure.
one question, just
Yeah.
Jamaica Bay considered on the coast. If I'm looking at Jamaica Bay Village, it's right by Lakes Park. So if you wanted to, that's
Yeah,
what
is
you're
is
going on to
Jamaica
see.
Bay on the coast? I would probably say so. There's a couple of different things. So one is the insurance aspect of it, and then one is the practical aspect of it, right? So the insurance, for instance, changed the flood zones for a lot of properties about, I think it was about 5 years ago. So, for instance, a lot of Cape Coral started to come into a flood zone, like a flood zone versus A, flood zone versus B. So, Jamaican Bay, where that is, if I recall, is off 41, because I'm trying to think of the proximity of water. Almost anything, first of all, anything is designated a flood zone. Like the Sahara Desert would be designated as a flood zone, except that they would give it like a flood zone D type of thing, where it says like once every 10,000 years you'll get flooding. Okay. So I think Jamaican Bay, for flooding insurance purposes, is not one where you have to have like flood insurance, to answer your question. I could look that up. But given that it's on US 41, if I recall, and it's to the east side of it, I think you have enough play in terms of land that it's not considered a flood zone type A, which is very expensive in terms of getting insurance. And just while we're on that, we'll get to insurance a little bit later. But to let you know, flood insurance is not just through the federal government, through FEMA. Flood insurance a number of years ago was privatized, so it actually worked out where it started to lower the cost of insurance. Of course, it was prior to Hurricane Ian hitting and doing a lot of damage, and then they're having to rethink their tables. But good question. Any other questions right now, Parrish? And does that answer the person's question? I hope. Okay, excellent. So this Part 3, how to best protect your property. I wanted to do a very quick timeline of what happens in a hurricane. And this is essential for any property manager, property owner, client of ours to really understand. Okay. So I wanted to start with this, by the way. This map over here is the storm track of Ian. I could have taken any hurricane, but I thought I would take Ian since that was the most devastating one that hit our area recently. And the first thing that you have to understand is how fast a hurricane kind of creates a panic in a local area for people to do things. So 2 weeks away from, say, Hurricane Ian, where that hurricane is somewhere off the coast of Africa as some type of storm cloud, tropical depression type of thing. It's not really on anybody's mind except for the meteorologist. Okay, so 2 weeks away, that's what's happening. A week away, right now, if I were looking at this map, which was like date stamped, it would literally be outside of the Caribbean or almost approaching the Caribbean. Okay, so 7 days away from where it actually hits landfall, where it hit us, a week away, it's literally somewhere around here, kind of by St. Lucia, Barbados, that sort of thing. What happens then is from 3 to 5 days, that's where things really start to happen. 5 days out, this is where the storm was for Hurricane Ian. Okay. And as we got to 4 and then kind of 3 days here, this is where the hurricane picks up speed. This is where the models are obviously becoming more clear. So as opposed to where it's over here, and they say, well, maybe it might hit west, it might come up through here and hit Texas. As it comes closer to the United States, the margin for error is getting smaller. And as that starts to happen, with about 3 days to go, that's right about where it was here. That's where you as a client or us as a property management company have to make some critical decisions. Because at this point, as the fever starts to build, and keep in mind that 3 to 5 days to go, we've had many, many warnings, highlights. This could hit us, and people will literally go to the store. They will take out all kinds of water. They will take plywood. They will just strip a lot of the essential supplies, batteries, right out. And people say to me, well, outside of Florida, like, well, wait, don't people save all that stuff? Like, why, as we start to have a hurricane approaching, why does this always happen? Because people have gone through the water. Maybe they've thrown the plywood out. Maybe it doesn't work anymore, that sort of thing. Okay. So 3 to 5 days out, if you're a client or a landlord and you want to do work on your properties, that's when you should be having a serious discussion with us. Okay. Could you possibly do work and the hurricane doesn't hit? Absolutely. And that's one of the issues we have because doing certain types of work is not necessarily inexpensive to protect your property, depending again, we'll get into that, how much it might be and what type of service you might need. Okay. So 3 to 5 days, that's where it's starting to get closer. You're starting to see these storm tracks. You're starting to, the people are starting to get a lot more concerned. People are starting to leave the area, depending on whether they're in a flood zone or evacuation zone and that sort of thing. 2 days to go on this model would be literally approaching, like the storm is, the northern part of it is hitting Cuba and Mexico, and as we found out was heading towards us. So right now the eye would be right around here, maybe a little bit more towards here, and we're almost getting to the point of starting to see some weather bands hitting us. With 2 days to go, you're literally talking about people are preparing. Those people that have made a conscious decision to stay are doing stuff to their homes. You're talking about people that might be saying to me, hey, Michael, I want to get ready for my home for this hurricane. Sounds like we are legitimately going to get hit. Can I go and do things? The vendors that we employ to put up certain window protection, for instance, they are also working on properties and now they're getting ready to prepare their own properties for what's going to happen, or they're in the process of getting out. So if you have rental properties or a client of ours and you're seeing, hey, like, the hurricane's going to hit in 2 days or the eye is going to make landfall in 2 days, we're already starting to feel a little bit of the effects of the hurricane. Some people, or a lot of people, have already left. Some people are going to shelters and that sort of thing. There's a lot happening. So if you wanted to do work on your property at that point, it's going to become very, very hard. Okay. And then obviously 1 day to go, people are normally sheltered in place and they're replying to emails and stuff like that. That's what I was doing during Ian and Irma and so forth. And then you're literally waiting to see what happens with this type of hurricane. Now, real quickly, one of the things before we get into the scope and what we do with the scope of work is there's this older home versus newer home syndrome, and some of it is right and some of it is wrong. Meaning, what most people think is that if my home or my rental property are older homes, then that's kind of bad. And all the newer homes, that are built in the last 10 years, these things are really good. There's going to be very little storm damage to it. And that's actually not the case. Okay, just to let you know. So, first of all, older homes, one of the problems that you have is obviously the window coverings. Like, for instance, myself, my home, that I live in was built in 1970. It's a single pane glass, that sort of thing. So the question is what type of coverings can you get for it because it was built so long ago? It wasn't built to current specifications, right? But you have older homes like even Jamaica Bay where you might have metal window awnings that you can close to protect the windows, right? You have, for instance, older homes. One of the things that you have to contemplate is what are the trees like around it. So one of the rental properties I have, again built in the late 1960s, beautiful trees to provide shade. That becomes a big detriment when hurricanes are hitting. Okay, so we work on cutting those back. The other thing about older homes is also whether you have a certain number of carports or a garage, or you don't have anything at all. So, in other words, what do the residents do if they have things like barbecues, or they have bikes, or lawn care, or chairs and stuff like that outside? If you have a carport, the carport isn't necessarily going to be safe for a lot of these things to be stored under. Okay, and if you do put them under, they better be all roped together and tied and that sort of stuff. So that's some of the issues that you go through with older homes. Newer homes, well, you're probably saying, hey, like maybe they're built with hurricane windows. That could very well be the case. Not necessarily always, but they could be. Or maybe they're a little bit more modern. Sometimes, though, we found out that there's not necessarily some great construction that happens. So we've had newer homes where the hurricane occurs and there's all kinds of damage that occurs afterwards. So just the fact that it's a newer home doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to get damaged by hurricanes in any way, shape, or form. Some of them do not have great construction. In fact, my home, knock on wood, like I told you, built in 1970s, I've gone through several hurricanes, category fives and fours, and I have, outside of my lanai and fence being damaged, I've had almost no damage to my property. And that's different from some of the newer construction. The other thing about a new home, if you bought it, is that you have a lack of history. So older homes that have been, say we've been managing for 20 years, we know the history of what happens during a hurricane. Is there flooding? Are there trees that cause problems, or have they been removed from previous hurricanes? So new home lacks a lot of that history. I know the parish was at a home in Kate during Ian, and you had newer home and the water's rising coming right up the driveway, and that when you're in a newer home, some of the things they've tried to have the specifications handle some of these, but there was still a lot of problems with the last hurricane, even with a new home. And again, you don't know what's going to happen with newer fencing. Ian, I saw a fence, brand new fence, was a year old, and half of it was gone. It was like one of those white like sheets fences that are pretty expensive, totally blown apart. And my wooden fence that was around for 20 years stood up much better. Another thing to consider when you're looking about how best to protect your property, okay, you're looking also at the height of the home. So sometimes it's something that you can adjust. Sometimes there are things that you could do for the elevation of your home. For instance, in Bonita Springs, where they had a lot of damage, some people like rebuilt things at a higher ground level. Sometimes they're able to lift even a garage off the ground, or AC condensers. You see a lot of that, where some of them now are suspended in the air by 6 feet and tied to the side of the building. So there's a lot of things that you can do to, if you've had experiences with hurricanes before, or you need to do some type of repair afterwards, there's all kinds of things, whether it's a newer or an older home, that you can do certain repairs that could hopefully help you in the future. Okay, another couple of aspects that you want to consider, obviously your roof. When was the last time it was done? So it doesn't matter whether the roof is brand new or whether it's 5 or 10 years old. The question is what's the quality of it? What's the type? And is something like, should you get it maybe looked at prior to hurricane season? Because what happens with the roof is, if you have shingled roof, the shingles are basically cosmetic. The shingles that fly off the roof don't necessarily stop, or they're meant to help stop and preserve the roof, okay? But it's the underlay that really prevents the water from leaking into the home. So that protective coating of shingles, if they fly off, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get water into your property. So sometimes you can do cosmetic changes to maybe help secure the roof a little bit longer. But again, it's something that you might want to consider when you're looking at how best to protect your property. Another final thing is also your stairs. So some of the older properties that you look at, stairs, they can be wooden, or they can be even concrete, but maybe the foundation is starting to wear out. The reason why I bring this up is when you have a lot of flooding, a couple of feet of flooding, it can obviously affect the foundation of the home. People trying to get out in case of an emergency, that sort of thing. So these types of things you want to look at when you're looking at how best to protect your property. And the main thing is really when you're looking at your property, what's happened in the past. And history is very, very important. So, like I said, I've been in the same home for 2 or 3 hurricanes now, major hurricanes. So I know that during Ian, my home did not flood. And that's a big thing to know versus some of you that have had places or some of our clients that flood regularly. And by the way, there's a new Florida law that talks about that. I won't get into that. That's maybe a topic for another discussion. But if you have had floods because of hurricanes or tropical storms, you're supposed to disclose that to people so that the renters know that, hey, if there's another hurricane coming, we've had a flooding occur before. We had one resident, as an example, that the flooding was so bad during Ian that they literally had to climb up higher than their kitchen countertops because the water just went right through their home at about 6 to 8 feet. Like again, these are the type of disclosures that, as a manager or even as a landlord, you want to share. It's a new Florida law that happened in 2025. Okay, so just wanted to cover that, and we could go on to part 4, getting towards the end here, guys. A little bit of who does the work. So talking a bit. You have a question or any questions right now? Good. All right. Thanks, Parrish. So who does the work? So again, this is a gray area, right? So when you're talking about, hey, my rental property is occupied. If obviously if your property is not occupied, then you have to make the decision yourself in terms of who's going to do it. Normally, you would have a vendor if you want to set stuff up, but maybe you even live near the area in Florida, might want to do something where it's a newer home. Okay, but basically the first thing you have to find out is if your property is occupied, what type of scope of work is going to occur. So there's a major difference when people talk about, hey, does my property manager do the work or how does this go about doing it? This is exactly some of the decisions that we face because what you do for a home versus a third floor condo is totally different. Okay, a single family home, for instance, in Bonita, you might be preparing for a flood. So you might be trying to get sandbags put around the place to help minimize what might come through the front door, the side door, the back door, or your lanai area. Again, if you have a pool home, you might consider draining some of the pool. Okay, just to give you an idea, in Hurricane Ian in the Fort Myers area, the approximate rainfall on the lower end was 7 inches. Okay, 7 inches. In Port Charlotte, where some of you might have heard that they actually had to close Interstate 75, which is obviously a major route all the way down the west coast of Florida, they had to close it because one of the rivers, their 8 foot high banks flooded, and they flooded I-75. The rainfall that happened in that area during Hurricane Ian was 27 inches. Okay, so again, when you're talking about that much rainfall and where does it go? Again, if you have a pool, you all of a sudden, if you fill up your full pool 2.5 feet of water or more, you can have obviously a problem. So then you're looking at a third floor condo where maybe in this case, for instance, you don't have to worry about flooding. And maybe it's something about protecting, say, the windows. And who knows, you could have even something electric, like hurricane storm shutters that come down electric, as an example. Or likewise, if you didn't, if you had to somehow manually do it, I don't think you want people, that are unqualified getting up on a ladder trying to do it as well. So the scope of the work is very, very important. The bigger issue for most people is the window treatments. So the question is about the window treatments is how do we go about doing it? Okay, and this gets into another big discussion, but I'm going to try to summarize this. So most of the time, older homes, you're talking about having types of plywood that you're going to put either into the wood or into the concrete stucco, and you have to literally drill into it. Okay, it was funny. One of my neighbors has an older home like myself. He put these plywood up, and some of them were crooked and that because they were rushing and doing it right. And so like most of the window was covered. I got it. Something is better than nothing. But again, is this something that you necessarily want the renter to be doing, right? When it's coming to plywood, Storm windows are often they're thicker than the regular type of windows, so maybe you're not as concerned about it. If you have hurricane windows as well, those are 2-ply where you have one pane of glass, you have a gas in between, and then a second pane of glass. Okay, those are meant to absorb impacts up to 150 miles per hour. Okay, so you probably don't have to do anything with regards to those. But if you have hurricane mesh, if you have hurricane shutters, the metal type that you have to put over, you never know. That sounds like a simple job, except when was the last time it was actually done? I put up hurricane mesh at one of my newer properties. It took me like 3 hours to do it, and it was a brand new home. And it was the first time ever used. Like it was about as mint as it was going to be. Okay, so when you're talking about window treatments, who does the work? Again, some of these window treatments, even if they're a newer home and they're supposed to be relatively done well, it can take a lot of time. Okay. Other thing, too, about the history of the property. Has it flooded before? Okay, so I talked to you about sandbags and whether people should put them out, for instance. Not that that would necessarily help with 8 feet storm surge, but still, in some of the other areas where you're having a couple of feet, or sometimes people have had some water trickle into their place, a couple of inches, something like that might actually happen. Also, what happens to lanai? Has it happened where the lanai has been blown away, fences come down, any type of history of the property should affect the scope of work and what you might be looking at doing, right? So with a lanai, you might be looking at trying to strengthen it, removing stuff out of the lanai, that sort of thing is very, very important. Um, Again, keep in mind that every hurricane, it's different, right? So I mentioned to you about how my pool cage was damaged. My neighbor's wasn't even touched. It's the same thing that can happen for your property where sometimes you're going to be doing a lot of preparation for it and nothing happens to it. That's a great thing. And other times you don't do much preparation and there could be some significant damage to it. So the main thing is that once you have an idea of what's happening with your property, what scope of work do I need to do? Is it a multifamily duplex? Is it a single family? Is it a condo? What do the structures look like for the windows? What's happened in the past do I know of? Did it flood during Ian? Am I looking at that a similar situation this time? Or it never flooded during Ian? And that's a great thing because that was probably one case where if the property is going to flood, it probably will flood during Ian compared to other hurricanes. But once again, you never know. And once you get this scope of work, this is where, as say a client of ours, this is where you talk with us, or as a landlord, you would talk with the renter directly and figure out what's actually happening. What type of work do we want to do? For some renters, they're going to be leaving the area. Some renters are going to be like, you know what? I'm going to see you in a week, 5 days to go before the hurricane hits. I've been through this before. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to stick around. Okay. So the idea that you can always ask a renter to do something simple is not necessarily always on the table. Remove some of their effects if they can and put it into the house. Yes, that's something that you can ask, and that's what most renters are going to do. But if you're talking about putting up window treatments and so forth, even if it's something like hurricane shutters, the metal ones that you hang and screw in and stuff like that, they may or may not even be around for that. Okay. Um, if you do, however, talk with the renter or we talk with the renter and they're like, yeah, sure, I'll put this up. The biggest thing that we have to do, and I encourage everybody to do, is sign a general liability waiver. Okay, we did it last time for Hurricane Ian. It works out well because here's what the issue is. You're the owner of a property and you want to protect your property, just like myself as a landlord. But the problem is what happens if the tenant is doing something that they're not qualified to do? They're not a general contractor or something like that. And like my neighbor, they were putting up, like say, plywood, and they make it crooked, and they're drilling stuff in, and the nails are too long. They don't use certain things to minimize what the exterior damage is going to look like, and they put it up in good faith without permission and then say the hurricane doesn't hit the right way, and now we have to take that stuff down after the hurricane. And you, as the owner, are now going, well, wait, um, what happened here? I've got like chunks of concrete that are out of the property, or maybe it doesn't look as nice. Maybe there's even some type of insurance issue in that. What we talk about is holding the renter harmless, and that the renter is going to hold the owner's harmless. So in other words, if the renter wants to go out and do certain stuff, that they're not going to hold you as the landlord, responsible for anything that happens, and then likewise, you're not going to hold them responsible for any partial damage or something that might occur on the property as well. So this general waiver liability we use, very, very important. Now, obviously, that can certainly be handled by independent contractors. We have independent contractors, but again, typically, if you want something done about 5 days before the hurricane, is where you really want to call us and say, "Hey, Michael or Parrish, I want my condo protected. I want, boards put up over the windows, that sort of stuff." And this way, we can go and do it and attend to it and make sure that you're okay. There are a lot of owners that say, "You know what? We're just going to ride it out," and others that say, no, no, I really do want to protect my investment. I'm concerned about what I'm seeing, and you never know what's going to happen. I don't want windows broken and so forth, and go from there. And I'm going to get into another part right now, towards the end of it, of insurance real quickly.
There is a
And
question in the chat, real quick, Michael,
sure, good.
about Yeah, there's one about if the authorities redirect 75 traffic when the mandatory evacuations are. I don't remember them doing that
Yes.
in the time I've been down here, but you can elaborate on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. Right. So okay, this gets into a different area. First of all, the I-75, the flooding. Um, I remember seeing it like even after the hurricane hit, everybody was getting redirected around I-75. So uh, it's kind of interesting. In a flood zone, people don't have to evacuate. During an evacuation order, what it looks like on the ground is that police or firefighters will sometimes go down the street and using a loud hailer telling people, listen, you really do want to get out of here. There's a high probability that there's going to be a lot of damage and that your life is at risk. Because not because necessarily of one thing, but if you need medical attention, they're not going to be able to get to you within X amount of time. So can they forcibly remove people from their homes? I've never heard of that. People still stay during an evacuation order. And in part, to be honest with you, one of the reasons why was because they had always talked about storm surge, and until Ian hit, storm surge was almost for the Fort Myers area, and Port Charlotte, and that was almost like a fairy tale. When Irma hit from the south in Naples, they got a storm surge, not as bad as Ian, but they got a storm surge, and that was about 3 or 4 feet, and that raised some eyebrows. So, can we force the renter out of their home because of an evacuation order? I don't think the state of Florida can force an owner out of their own home, let alone a tenant that's renting it. Remember, the tenant has almost the exact same rights as an owner, except that they can't sell the property according to law. So I can always find out, but I've never heard of a management company saying something like, you need to leave because the hurricane's coming, otherwise we're going to non-renew you. I don't think that would happen. Very well, it would go very well in a court of law. And the other thing that happens too is that sometimes the hurricanes miss. And so I can tell you, I mean, Parrish could probably agree with this too, but for the longest time, like, oh, the hurricane's coming, the hurricane's coming. 7 days out, we're not even concerned about whether the hurricane's going to hit us or not, in the sense of we don't know for sure that the hurricane is going to hit us. Because there have been plenty of times where there's a possibility it might hit, and then it spins off and it hits, Mexico or something. So, great question. Hopefully that question gets answered. Another part about the insurance with regards to your window covering, check your insurance policy, because there could be some riders where they say if you have hurricane shutters, you have to put them up in case of a hurricane. Okay, so you might want to talk to your insurance agent about it. Again, I'm going to go through the insurance relatively quickly here. I appreciate it. You guys are getting all this detail, and hopefully you're liking what you're hearing, or at least it's informative. So again, if you have a newer property, it has hurricane shutters, they might ask you to actually put them on, in which case, again, whether it's the renter that you have an agreement with, or us with the renter, or you have a vendor doing it, you have to look into that yourself, because maybe they might not carry the same type of insurance or deductible. Now, What does insurance normally cover? And I don't want to go through all kinds of policies and stuff like that. That would be very, very boring and that. But first of all, we have to talk about what people call wind damage. And wind damage, when they say, well, what's your wind damage policy? What they're actually talking about is your hurricane deductible. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but I have a policy right here and it's in big bold letters, okay? And it talks about the calendar year hurricane deductible. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about wind damage caused by a hurricane. Now, you can always adjust it. It's normally a percentage, like 2% deductible, 5%, 10% deductible. And as you raise your deductible, obviously your insurance rate will go down because the insurance company is less on the hook for it, okay? But this is something that's in bold. They made it very specific for people in Florida so they can find out whether they have, hurricane damage, what the deductible is. You can raise it, lower it, that sort of stuff. Now, here's an important aspect you might not know about insurance. Okay, this hurricane deductible is only used, shockingly, when there's a hurricane or a hurricane warning or a hurricane watch. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Last weekend in Sanibel and St. James City, they had 7 inches of rain from a storm. They had flooding. People lost their cars, believe it or not, all that sort of stuff. And what I mean by that is because there was no hurricane watch, hurricane warning, or an actual hurricane, that means that all the damage that happened would fall under the regular insurance policy, not your hurricane deductible. Okay, does that make sense? So hurricane deductible is only for when we have a hurricane. Okay. The other thing is when we're talking about flood damage is expensive, and for some places it's optional. Other places, because they changed the flood zone, they made it mandatory. So you could, for instance, if you want, get flood insurance in Lehigh, even though it's not mandatory, and there's probably no reason you feel to get flood insurance. But and again, flood insurance is something that, again, I don't know if you can see it, but I highlighted it here. It will say even on my insurance policy for one of my properties, it says this policy does not provide flood coverage. Now, flood is different from storm surge, but again, flood damage can also occur if you're in, say, a different state and you have a mudslide. Okay, so when it rains and causes a mudslide, like what happened with one of the hurricanes in North Carolina, tragically, that type of insurance stuff, the mudslide is actually covered under flood damage, believe it or not. Okay, flood insurance is very expensive, typically, depending on where you are. It was increased dramatically, and again, what I've been hearing about, I'm going to work on another video. More insurance companies are coming back to Florida now that, after 3 years of a major hurricane. That's a good thing because it will start lowering things like flood insurance. It will start lowering your hurricane deductible, how much it costs, and general insurance policies as well. And a final aspect of insurance, we talk about this from a property management side of things, is resident damage. So their personal belongings and that. And I know that most people think like, well, you know what? If that's up to them, and you're totally right, except lawsuits do happen, right? And so one of the things that we always strongly recommend that we provide for a lot of our residents is a resident benefit package where they have renters insurance. That's always great, where they can go to the renters insurance side of things, take care of all their deductibles and stuff like that, and feel good, because if they come back to a rental property and it's been damaged, flooded, and that, and they're out of pocket everything, you never know. There's always attorneys that are looking at picking up those cases. So, real quickly, any questions on that before I get to the last point of what happens after a hurricane? We good, Parrish? Okay, excellent. All right. So, there's a lot of different things that happen after a hurricane, and it's very hard to kind of make this a simple process for everybody to understand if you've never lived through it. Okay, so the first thing that happens is there could be a curfew at night. I know that happened in Charlie. It happened for a couple of other ones where they literally shut down the bridge access at night for repair crews and so forth. They also had places where you wouldn't go to and so forth. So that's the first thing, is that you don't have unlimited access to everywhere to go. The next thing that becomes very, very important is what's the situation with power. Now, this sounds kind of, comical, but after a hurricane hits, if you're somebody that's sitting out of state and you're worried about your rental property, you obviously want to try to communicate with, say, us. Now, good thing is we have 3 offices, and sometimes we might have power to one or two or three of the offices. Sometimes we don't have any power. In fact, one hurricane, our main office lost water. There was so much damage that we didn't even have water for a week and a half after the hurricane. Okay, so the power situation affects a lot of things. Our cell phone use, the ability to regularly talk with you guys through email, computers. Do we have power in our home versus our office? So sometimes we've lucked out and I've been able to send everybody emails from my home or my office. So the biggest thing that happens right afterwards is what's happening with the power. This, because we're in the central part of Fort Myers, typically our power comes back relatively quickly within a week or so. Okay, sometimes faster. Like I said to you, that one time we had water, we didn't have water for like a week and a half to 2 weeks. That was always interesting to work around that, but we did. Okay, the next thing that happens is also gas. Now the biggest thing is that when people say, hey Michael, what's happening with our property, it's the availability of gas. So first of all, the power needs to be on for us to be able to fill up our cars, our trucks, to be able to drive around. And it's the uncertainty that's really the big killer in this case. Because what happens is everybody prior to a hurricane is trying to fill up some gas tanks. They're filling up their vehicle. They're putting it, say, maybe in a garage if they have it, and they're waiting. And then after the hurricane blows through, and then probably 12 hours after the fact, some people are starting to say, okay, I want to go outside. I want to see what's happening around in the area. Somebody like myself, Parrish, were like, how are the offices doing? What's happening? Okay. The problem is that depending on the extent of damage, you may not be able to fill up your gas tank again. And not only that, but gas stations are roped off and closed. And some of them that are open are only open to emergency vehicles because they're controlling the gas situation so that they can get out, carve up trees and remove them from the road and get rid of lighting and stuff like that, the street lights and stuff like that that don't work. They're trying to go out there and take care of it. They don't want everybody joyriding on the road after a hurricane. So for us as a property management company, it's not even a question of us saying we don't. What are we going to do? We're going to stay at home. We want to get out to the properties. We want to see the damage. Or lack, hopefully, of damage there is, but we don't necessarily have the ability to drive freely, whether it's the gas, whether it's curfews, whether it's the police saying, no, you're not coming down here because the traffic lights are all out. So it's a very, very difficult time for us to freely move around. And then, of course, you get to the situation of communications. Do we have power? Do we even have cable? So sometimes we might even have power, but the cable, our ability to communicate through email was gone, Wi-Fi gone, that sort of stuff. So sometimes we can send texts. Another interesting fact that most people don't realize is that after a hurricane, they shut down the bandwidth for phones. So if you've ever had somebody in a hurricane zone and you try to call them right afterwards and they're saying the call cannot be completed as dialed, it's because they've literally shut off the bandwidth for everybody else, and they're giving all that bandwidth to police, the firefighters, emergency service people, like tree people that are removing, garbage, trash, that sort of stuff, felled trees, power lines down, that sort of thing. Okay, and then once we try to get a little bit more of a grip on what's happening, do we have gas? Do we have power? How can we communicate? Then what we do is we go out certainly to see the properties, and if we have communication with the tenants, we try to reach out to the tenants and say, hey, are you here? Sometimes the tenants will say, I'm not even close. I left 5 days ago. I have no idea. Could you please tell me what the property looks like too? And go from there. And so it's a pretty chaotic time, but one of the things that we try to do is get to you as soon as we can and go from there. Okay, and we know that it's a high priority. It's an emergency for us. It's critical importance for us to check in on our renters to see how they're doing, and obviously to do whatever we need to do for the properties. Kind of a final note is also emergency repairs. And if we see a dangerous situation, like we saw in Ian with trees that are leaning on power lines or on carports and that, again, just to let you know, what we try to do immediately, somebody like Carmen and Yoda, they start to prioritize these things. And as soon as somebody can leave, they go out with a chainsaw and remove it because we don't want property damage to occur on your property because of felled trees and so forth. So I tried to give you a little bit of the chaos that happens after a hurricane, and it's a lot. I've been through a dozen of them. We have a lot of different policies in place, but every single hurricane is different. Like I said, not having water for the main office for 2 weeks was certainly something I hadn't experienced, but now I experienced it, so we're ready for that as well. So a couple of final thoughts, and then if you want, I'll take a question or two or whatever you guys have. Again, you can always email me. But one of the big things is don't just think that the renter will do it. Again, like I mentioned to you, some people are leaving a week ahead of time, 5 days ahead of time. So if your property's in place and you think, hey, I've got a condo that's got some easy stuff that you can do, or a single family home, it's brand new and they just have to put the slots over the windows, the renter might be able to do it, but they might not even be in town when that happens. Okay. Again, don't think that the renter can do it. Okay, so don't assume that this is easy, that it's automatically done and it's going to be done well. Also, like we talked about, for a lot of the cases, you might want to consider hiring a vendor to do it. And please give us a lot of lead time, 5 days, 4 days, that sort of stuff. We'll do the best that we can. We did button down like several dozen properties at the last hurricane, and then we had Milton and Helene, which wasn't luckily as bad for us. Still had some flooding, but not the typical storm damage we had. So again, from an owner perspective, we'll reach out to you. But if you want us to generally do something, we can even start looking for a vendor for you today and put it on file and say, ABC is going to go out in case of a hurricane. Contact the vendor. And then one of the bigger things is, again, if the renter is going to do the work, if you're a landlord, or do what we do, get a general liability release. We want the tenant might be saying, "Hey, I want to protect the property too, just like the owner, but we want it to be done in good faith, so that if something does go wrong, the renter's not going to be held responsible for something they didn't deliberately want to try and do." And likewise, the same thing for you guys. We want to protect your interests as well. And if you have any other
Sure.
questions, you can always email me at mike@redfortress.pm.com. I'm always here for topics or something like this. And honestly, guys, I know it's a lot of information. I wanted to share a lot of things that happen, a lot of things that you won't even read about what happens during hurricanes. So if you have any questions or comments, I can take them now, or again, you can always email me later, and I'll turn it over to you, Parrish.
Question.
Yes,
Mr. McVety,
yes,
been with you since the late 90s.
yes.
As far as the form, the waiver is concerned, do you have a form like on your website?
Well, what we do is, since you're a client of ours, James, and good to have you. By the way, yes, we have a form that we send out to the renter. So let's just say about 6 days to go before the hurricane, maybe you're like, hey, I'm looking in the news that something might be coming, and that's where
Hmm.
we'll send off to somebody and say, hey, listen, what type of supplies do we have there? Again, guys, even if you have a brand new home that has hurricane shutters, how do you know that all the materials and equipment are there? What happens if they're missing nuts and bolts? The
Right.
tenant now has to go to some like Ace Hardware to try and
Hmm.
don't forget, they've probably cleared a lot of that stuff out. So James, you have like a multifamily situation. So
Correct.
luckily you're I don't think had like flooding issues, luckily, last time from Ian. But like again, for your case where you have, say, I don't know, a dozen windows, it might be easier to hire a vendor that can go at once, put it up. And then the other thing is, guys, when do they take them down? And
Right.
one of the funny things is that everybody wants them up, but as soon as the hurricane's gone, I can assure you they want them down like an hour after it. Okay, because it's shocking, but the weather is beautiful. There's not a cloud in the sky, and they're like, I don't want to be in darkness like some kind of like basement. I want them off, and that's the other situation where we have to start working with the vendors to try and take them off in a timely fashion and work with the renters. So for you, James, I would probably say that it would be better to have a vendor lined up for it. You have a multi-family
Okay.
situation.
I
Good
have a
question.
quick question.
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'm a client as well, and I'm just wondering if the tenant, are they required to have their own property insurance coverage with regard to, just their personal property?
Yes, a great question. So there's two ways that they can get it. In their lease today, we say that they need to
Mhm.
have renter's insurance. Okay. But like any renter's insurance or any insurance that you and I have, Chris, a renter could like do a stop payment or not pay it in time and it lapses. And one of the problems that we have as a management company for any type of insurance, owner, renter hours, well, ours is a little bit different because we get notified. The other areas we don't normally get notified. So if a tenant has, at the time of signing a lease, renter's insurance, they're supposed to have it, but then they stop paying it, we're not going to
Right.
necessarily get notified. Now, what we have, and you'll see it often on our website, see some owners don't kind of like this sort of thing. They're like, well, let's just have rent, and whatever happens to the renter is something else. But we have on our website resident benefit packages like most professional management companies have, where they can build their credit, they can have renters insurance. So part of the issue is that let's just say for renters insurance isn't just for hurricanes. There's a classic case in point where I'll never forget, Chris. We had somebody that was moving out of a property. They gave notice. I'm moving out, say the end of August. They're moving their stuff into the garage area. 2 days before they move out, the water heater leaks all over the garage floor and has nothing to do with a hurricane. This is exactly what renters insurance is for. A lot of the renters don't understand this. So when we say, well, we want to have a resident benefit package, we can get you renters insurance that's very good. It's very cost effective. In fact, Parish does this a lot, but in terms of like setting people up and that. But I think there's only been like 2 or 3 actual renters of ours that had renters insurance prior to signing a lease, and even they said that the insurance they can get through us as a professional management company through a third party is cheaper. So, great question, Chris. And like I said about that insurance, we would like to have all of our insurance renters have insurance. It's for liability in case somebody slips and falls. They're having a party at their home and somebody slips and falls. That's under the renter's insurance. If they
I
have,
have coverage anyway, so at least I'm covered there, but
yeah,
just
exactly. But we do ask that for that very particular reason. Now you can argue, well, is every aspect of the renter's insurance going to cover them in case of flood or wind or that? That gets very technical, and in some ways, no, because just like a homeowner's policy, we don't have protection for absolutely everything either, unless we choose to have flood insurance, we choose to have a low deductible, that sort of thing. But great question. We do ask in the lease that the renters have renter's insurance, and we provide it
okay.
through our resident benefit package. Any other questions?
Hey, Michael, my name's Elizabeth, and I actually live in Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh, great.
My question is, my husband and I are very new to this
Okay.
out-of-state ownership being down in Florida. But my question would be, is there a list somewhere on the website that you all recommend vendors for specific different jobs that would be needed? Or if because I'm a worrywart, I have family that lives in Sarasota and Bradenton, and I've never actually been down there through a hurricane, but I have been FaceTime during a hurricane last year on Ian. And it scared me to death, and I was 900 miles away. So I can't imagine literally going through something like that. But I guess sooner or later I will find that out, because we are preparing to relocate down to the Fort Myers area. But is there a list of vendors that you all recommend for different types of jobs to do on rental properties?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, certainly the scope of work depends a lot on that, but absolutely, Elizabeth. And not to worry about being a worrywart. That's one of the things that the media does. I had people calling me from Australia, some of our clients, and wondering whether like Fort Myers still existed after the hurricane. So it's meant to certainly promote the worst type of damage, and that has a tendency to skew what's actually happening. That's why I wanted to do this seminar today and let you know what it's like to live through a dozen of them. When it comes to our vendors, normally what you're looking at is a general handyman, where we have probably about 3 or 4 different vendors that we use. Typically guys that are able to, say, put up drywwood or plywood, I should say. Hurricane shutters, that sort of thing. Also, people that are able to diagnose what's missing from them. If you're dealing with other types of things, like, I don't know, sandbags and that, it might be somebody different. But we have a host of people that we use the issue becomes, Elizabeth, quite frankly, that as we get closer, like I said, 2 days away, it becomes very hard for us to use our vendors anymore, because they're tied up either finishing the last of the projects. When I say that, like we literally had one or two of them the day before the hurricane fixing some of our rental properties and then rushing off back home to finish theirs. So the closer we get to the hurricane, the more we're like, we're going to call somebody randomly and then they're going to charge a premium price. So, but to answer your question, we do have vendors that we believe are great at what they do. And if, they're going to get the job done. And if they don't, they're going to let us know.
Okay. Okay. I was just wondering that because again, we're fairly new to this and it took me all of 3 minutes to actually find the Super Walmart behind the Jamaica Bay.
Yes.
And I know from going there on a daily basis during our renovation for 2 weeks in July that gets very crowded. And of course and the media does hype it up, and it's just I just worry. And safety first, everybody please be safe during this hurricane season and protect yourself, protect your loved ones.
Well, exactly. And you never know. Like I said, each hurricane's different. And Elizabeth, just like I was saying for us at Red Fortress, our staff, once we know what's happening with our properties, and our family, or whether we're in the area or out of the area, a lot of us stay in the area because we've been through this before. But right, we're immediately like, okay, so how are our residents doing? How are our rental properties doing? Like, who needs help? You never know what situation. I mean, some of the stories from Ian, like I said to you about the flooding in some of the homes was just so sad. We try to do whatever we can to help the residents out, and then obviously go from there and help the property out. So you have reason to worry, but the good thing is that there's a lot of preparation you can do to lessen that worry, and that's what we're here for. We've done it through a lot of hurricanes, and we're ready to go for the next one, which will probably happen. I think Parrish and I were talking about this. We're probably going to happen in about like 30 years. That's what I think it's 30 years from now.
One could only hope.
Exactly, exactly. So, guys, I hope this has been informative. Again, if you have questions, and great questions, by the way, but if something comes to mind later, if a month from now, you see a storm cloud off of Africa and you're like, hey, I remember what Michael said, let me send him an email on that. Please do. I'd be happy to answer your questions. We're here to help and obviously, protect your property, make you guys feel good and valued as clients. So if there's no other further questions, I wish you a great night and we'll be in touch in the future.